everyone, this is Rosie, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to construct my new pattern, which I'm calling Rosie's Messenger Bag. So let's get started. To get started, you need to print out a few pages. First, you have the 2 pages that are your cutting charts. So one page will be for the exterior pieces. It gives you the size. I'm using waxed canvas. For lining, I'm using 100% cotton quilting fabric. And for my woven interfacing, I'm using Woven Fuse 2, and I'm also using some Decoville Light. So this will tell you exactly what you need to cut out and the sizes that you need to cut. And then the second page is the cutting chart for the interior bag. And same thing, it tells you the size, what you need to cut, and what you need to cut for interfacings. And then you will also need to print out this template here, and this is the template that you're going to be using to cut out the curves on some of the pieces. Now, when you print this out, you want to make sure that you set your printer to print this at 100%. You do not want to scale this. And then there is a test square here. So once you've printed everything out, you're going to measure that square, and it should measure 2 inches across and 2 inches from top to bottom. And it's very important that this is accurate, because if it's not, then the size of this template is not going to be correct and your pieces will not fit together properly. And then when you cut it out, you want to cut out on the outer line right here. So the outside of that black line is where you will cut. And you'll just cut all the way around. So just make sure that you don't cut off the black line. You just want to cut right to the outside of that black line. Now, in the upcoming clips, you're going to see me using a template with the rounded edge so that I can cut my curves out on some of the pieces. I did not use this template. This is the template that I used. I drew it by hand, but you'll see it's exactly the right size of the template that I created in Adobe Illustrator. So you will not have to create your own template. You have one here all ready for you to use. Now, where do you get these files? They are going to be on my website. This is a free pattern, so all you need to do is go onto the website and download all of the pages, and I will put a link to that blog post in the description below this video. I will be making the exterior of this bag out of waxed canvas, and the interior will be made from a 100% cotton quilting fabric. So to make the bag, you do need some thread, obviously. This is the Gutermann Mara 70. I'm using this thread. It's a little bit of a heavier weight thread. And I'll be sewing on my Juki TL 2010Q, which will accommodate the extra thickness of this thread. If you're using a different sewing machine, then you'll have to check with the manufacturer to see whether or not it can handle this thread. If not, use an appropriate size thread for your machine. Then you'll need some hardware. I'm using 1.5 inch wide hardware. You'll need 2 single loop rectangular pieces of hardware and 1 double loop rectangular piece of hardware. And you'll need 2 zippers. I'm using zippers by the yard. So I've already cut them to length. One of the zippers needs to be 12 inches long. So from edge to edge, you can see the zipper teeth go all the way out to the edge. One of the zippers needs to be 12 inches long, and the second one needs to be 14 inches long. And then you'll need some scrap pieces of fabric. So this is the waxed canvas that I'm using to make your zipper tabs. I've already cut out all of my pattern pieces using the cutting charts that I just showed you, and I've given each piece a label. The pieces that are cut from the waxed canvas do not need any interfacing. But the pieces that are cut from the 100% quilting cotton fabrics do need interfacings. Some of them just use a woven interfacing. I'm using Woven Fuse 2, and some of them will require some Decoville Light. And for all of the pieces with the woven interfacing, I have already fused that to the back of each piece. And I have here the pieces of Decoville Light, which we will be fusing later. We need to mark the curves on the bottom of some of the pieces using our template. And the pieces that you need to do this to are marked with an asterisk on your cutting chart. And they would be your lower front, your front pocket, your flap, the lower back, the front zipper pocket, the back zipper pocket, the front and back lining, and the center divider. So I'll show you how to do that. I have my center divider pieces right here, and we're going to mark the bottom curves. You only want to mark the curves on the bottom of the piece, not on the top. This top needs to stay square. So you will mark a curve on this side, and then you'll mark the curve on the opposite side. And I'm going to do that from the wrong side of the piece, so on the woven fuse side. So let's go ahead and mark this one first. Make sure that your edges are all even. The edge of the pattern piece is even with the edge of the fabric piece. Go ahead and mark your curve. You'll flip it over and mark the other side. And the center divider also has some Decoville light interfacing, so you want to take that piece and do the same exact thing. You want to mark the curve on both sides. And then once you have your curves marked on all of the pieces, you'll just take a pair of scissors and cut out the curve. Once you've finished marking and cutting out the curves on your pattern pieces, you're going to have two pattern pieces that need to have some Decoville fused to the back. And that will be your front and back lining and your center divider. So we're going to take the center divider. I want to show you how I mark to fuse on that Decoville. And I'm going to turn it over to the wrong side. So this is the side with the woven fuse 2 on it. And I'll take a ruler and I'm going to mark 1/2 of an inch down from this straight edge right here. And again, I'm using a friction pen. You want to be very careful with these pens because the marks will disappear with heat, but they do come back with cold. So I only mark on an area that will never be seen. And then you want to mark in 1/2 inch from each edge right here. And you don't have to mark all the way down. And then you'll take the piece of Decoville that you previously cut out, and you're going to place these corners right up in between those marks there. So just carefully place everything, and then you'll take this over to your iron and you'll fuse this down according to the manufacturer's instructions. And you want to do that on all 4 of the pieces. I finished fusing the Decoville light to all the pieces, and this is what it should look like. You want to have the Decoville outside of your seam allowances here, and your seam allowances will be 1/2 of an inch for most of the project. Now we're going to construct the front of the bag. So you're going to need the 12-inch zipper that you cut from the Zipper by the Yard tape, and it is 12 inches right from this edge to this edge here. And then you'll need the piece of scrap that you have for the zipper tabs. You'll need the upper front, the lower front, the front pocket pieces, that includes the fabric with the canvas, and you'll need your front zipper pocket pieces. I have my 12-inch zipper right here, and you want to go ahead and find the center of that zipper. I marked mine with a chalk wheel right at the center. And then I took the scrap pieces that I have for my zipper tabs and I cut them to 2.5 inches high by 3 inches wide. And you're going to take each one of those and just fold it in half, and then you're going to slip the zipper right in between, butting it right up to the fold. And you'll go over to the sewing machine and you want to sew 1/2 inch away from this edge right here. And then you'll do the same thing at the other end. You'll take the other zipper tab, fold it in half, and then you're going to place this end of the zipper right inside there. and then you'll sew this end 1/2 inch away from the edge. And I'm going to go do that off camera right now. I've sewn the zipper tabs to both ends of the zippers. I used a stitch length of 2.5 and I have a seam allowance here of 1/2 inch, and I did back stitch. And once they're sewn on, you're just going to take it and pull it out just like this. And then after you have it all nice and flat, you're going to go ahead and top stitch 1/8 inch away from the edge here. You'll do that on both ends. Here's the zipper all completed with the tabs, and I did sew 1/8 inch away from each folded edge of the tab with a stitch length of 3.0. So now we're ready to attach this to the lower front bag. And I have that right here. And what you want to do is find the center of this piece. So I'm just going to simply fold it in half and make a little crease. And then I'm going to take the zipper and I'm going to match up the marks that I made at the center of the zipper with the center of the lower front. And I'll just clip that in place with some Wonder Clips. And then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew 1/4 inch all along the zipper edge here. I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 3.0 and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now on my machine, the distance between the edge of the presser foot right here and the needle is approximately 1/4 inch. If you need to use a zipper foot here, that's fine too. And again, I'm sewing with a Juki TL 2010Q. And you do want to back stitch. Now when you're sewing the zipper on, you do have to pull your zipper pull out of the way to begin. And then once you get far enough along, you can go ahead and close up that zipper. And then you're going to back stitch at the edge. Now that we have the zipper sewn into the lower part of the front bag, we're going to do the same thing with the upper front. So you'll take your upper front, fold it in half to find the center. And then you're going to pin this upper front right here to the opposite side of the zipper. And again, you want to match up the marking that you made on the center of the zipper with the center of the upper front piece. You'll clip it all together, and then we're going to go and sew it exactly the way we sewed this side of the zipper. As we get ready to sew on the other side of the zipper, keep in mind that you need to make sure that the edges here are even. So here's the upper front piece and here's the lower front piece. You want to make sure that these edges are even on both ends. So we're going to sew just like we did before with a stitch length of 3.0 and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at both ends. Right now my zipper pull is at the other end. And then as I get close to this zipper pull, I'm going to stop with my needle down, pull up my presser foot, and then I'll reach under, and actually I don't even have to reach under, I can just push my zipper. You may not be able to do this with all zippers, but if you can't, then you just reach under, grab your zipper pull, and pull it past the presser foot. And then you can continue sewing to the end. And then back stitch at the end. Once you have the zipper sewn on the other side, you'll just turn it over, fold this up, and then finger press it down. The nice thing about wax canvas is that you can just finger press it and it will stay in place. Now, this is important. You want to make sure that from the bottom of this piece to the top measures 11 inches. So just go get yourself a ruler and just measure. It should be 11 inches if you've cut and sewn correctly. And now you can go ahead and trim off the ends of the zipper tabs. Now we're going to work on the front pocket, so you'll need to take your canvas piece and the lining piece for that pocket. And we're going to start with the canvas. So you want to find the center of it. So just fold it in half and line up all of your edges. And then you can just make a little crease at the center. And the same thing with the bottom. Make sure that all your curves and everything are matched up nicely. And then just make a little crease. And you can see I have a crease mark here and here. I just want to take my ruler and mark those creases with my chalk wheel. And that's the center of the panel right there. Now the next thing that I want to do is measure 2 inches out from each side of that center mark. Okay. And then we're going to bring back the pocket lining right here, and we want to pin that or clip it right sides together with the piece of canvas. And we're going to clip all along the length of it. And we'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew 1/2 of an inch away from this edge. And we'll sew with a 2.5 inch stitch length, and I will be doing that off camera. Now, if you're not confident about keeping a nice 1/2 inch straight seam, what you can do is take your ruler and just simply mark 1/2 of an inch away from the edge. And then you'll go over to your sewing machine, you'll sew right on that line. Now I just finished sewing that 1/2 inch seam, and what I'm going to do now is flip this over, and I'm going to flip this up like this and really just finger press it. Now I don't iron this seam down because you never want to iron on waxed canvas. And then I'll bring the lining to the opposite side, and then I'm just going to finger press it the best that I can, and I'll clip it along the way. And once I have it all clipped and the seam is nice and flat, I'll go back over to the sewing machine and I'm just going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from that top edge. I'm getting ready to do my top stitching, and I'm going to just top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge right here. And I'll be using the middle of this toe as a guide. Now, whatever machine you're using, you'll have to decide where 1/8 of an inch would be on your presser foot, or you can use an edge guide foot to do this. So I'm going to sew this with a stitch length of 3.0, and do on a back stitch. And back stitch at the end. Top stitching is done, so the next step is to fold on these lines here, on these chalk lines. And then you're just going to match it up with the center chalk line. And you can put a couple of clips in just to hold it in place. One at the top and one at the bottom. And then you'll do the same thing on this side. You want to fold on this chalk line right here. And then you'll fold that right into the center, just like that. And then you just want to check the back where the lining is and make sure that everything looks nice and flat and smooth. Then you're going to go ahead and take the front panel piece right here, and we just want to fit this onto here to make sure that everything lines up. You want all of the edges to be even, so all the pocket edges need to be even with the edge of the bag. Make sure it's even to the bottom all around. And this looks like a nice fit. So what I'm going to do right now is take this off of here, and I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along both of these edges right here. But when you do it, you'll need to release the clips, and you just flip it this way, okay, and then just top stitch. So you don't want to catch anything underneath here, you just want to top stitch on the fold. So now I'm going to do the top stitching on the pocket, and again I'm only stitching through that fold right there. And again I'm just going to stitch with a 3.0 stitch length, 1/8 of an inch away from the fold. And you do want to back stitch here. And back stitch at the end. And now I'm going to back stitch through the second fold right there. Here's what the piece looks like now after I've top stitched both folds. And this is what it looks like on the other side. You want to make sure that the lining fabric gets caught within that top stitching. And then we're going to bring back the exterior front of the bag, and we want to clip this to the bag, making sure that you match up all of your edges. So just go ahead and clip this all around. I have the pocket clipped to the bag now. I did not clip all the way around. I only clipped to this point right here, and then I put 2 right in the center. And these are the marks that we originally drew before we put on the lining. I just darkened them up a little bit so that you can see them better. So this was one of the fold lines. What we want to do is go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to pull this pocket back this way, and then we're going to sew right down that line right there. And then after we do that one, we'll pull back this way, and then we'll sew right down this line right here. Now when you clip all this in place, we want to make sure also that you have an equal distance between the top of the pocket right here and this seam right along here on both sides. I have the piece in the sewing machine right now, and I'm just going to stitch down this line right here, and then I'll move over and stitch down the one on the other side. We're not stitching the one in the middle, and I am going to use a stitch length of 3.0, and as always you do want to back stitch. Okay, now that that one is done, I will pull this side of the pocket out of the way and make sure that it's laying flat. And now I'm going to stitch down the other line. You do want to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat when you do this. Now that I have these lines stitched down, I'm just going to move everything back to the center the way it was. Make sure it's laying nice and flat. And then I'll just finish clipping these edges together. And then after they're clipped, you're going to go back over to the sewing machine and you're just going to baste. You'll start around here and you're just going to baste all the way around the bottom and up the side. You'll stop a little bit beyond the pocket. You want to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the edge all around, and you can just base stitch. So it could be stitch length of 3.0, 3.5, whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm going to go and do that now off camera. My base stitching is completed, and now we're ready to sew in the lining for the interior pocket. And if you take your lining pieces, you're going to see that they're actually 2 different lengths. So this is one here, and you can see you've cut it a little bit shorter than the one on the bottom. The shorter one is going to be sewn to this side of the zipper right here. So if we flip this over, okay, we're going to pin this or clip it to this side of the zipper. And once it's all clipped into place, you're going to go over to the sewing machine and you're going to sew that on following the previous line of stitching right here. Now I'm going to sew the pocket lining to the opposite side of the zipper. And again, you're just going to follow along that previous line of stitching, and I will be stitching with a stitch length of 3.0. My zipper pull right now is at the other end of this pocket, so I don't have to worry about it for starting out. So 3.0, and just follow the previous line of stitching. And you do want to back stitch. Stay on that line of stitching the best you can. And back stitch at the end. Now you can see I have a little jog right here. That's because I forgot to pull my zipper pull out of the way. So I'm just going to go back over it. I'm going to drop my needle back down. I'll just do a little bit of a back stitch. And there you go. Now that I have the lining stitched into place, all I need to do is turn this up like this, fold down the pocket lining, and make sure my edges are all even here. And again, you cannot iron on your waxed canvas, so you're just going to sort of finger press everything in place very nicely. Make sure that all your edges and your bottom edges are even. And then what we're going to do is top stitch right along this edge right here, and it's going to stitch through the canvas and through the lining. And what I suggest is that you clip all around the curves to make sure that everything is even before you do that. And now I'm ready to do that top stitching right over here. Again, a stitch length of 3.0, and I'm just going 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge. The top stitching here is complete, and now we're ready to add in the lining for the opposite side of the zipper along this edge here. So I'm going to take my piece of lining and place it face up, and then I want to take this piece right here and place it right on top of that lining. And I want to make sure that all of the edges are even. So just be careful to line everything up. And once you're sure that it's all nice and even, you're just going to clip all of those pieces together. So you're going to clip it together with the new lining all the way around. And you're going to turn it over, make sure that's all laying nice and flat, edges are even, and then you're just going to flip it this way, and you're going to sew right along your previous line of stitching. Don't worry that that's a little bit longer, it does not matter at all. And then after we sew along this previous line of stitching, we're going to go ahead and top stitch along this folded edge, and then we're going to baste all of the pieces all the way around. And we'll go and do that together at the sewing machine right now. Now I'm sewing on the opposite side of the zipper with a stitch length of 3.0, and I'm just going to back stitch and stay on that line of stitching. Now when you get to the zipper pull, remember to pull that out of the way. And my zipper pull is right here, so I'm just going to slide that away. Okay, now that we have the lining all sewn in, we're just going to push this up and finger press it really well. And if you open up the zipper, you can see this is the lining, the back lining that we just sewed into place. And now I'm going to do the top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge right here. And again, a stitch length of 3.0. Okay, and now that that's done, we're just going to slide over to here, and we're going to baste through all of the layers. And you can baste stitch right over the line where you did before. Here's our front completed, and this is what you should have so far. Your two pockets should be sewn into place. If you open up your zipper, you'll see that you have your front lining sewn in place and your rear lining sewn in place, and you will not see any raw edges here. And it's going to give you a nice deep pocket. The pocket goes the whole depth of the bag. And this is what it looks like on the back, with everything laying nice and flat. And your piece should still measure 11 inches from the bottom up until your top edge. Now we're going to work on the flap. So you need your lining piece for the flap and the exterior canvas piece. And we're going to start with this piece right here with the lining piece. And you want to get a ruler, and we're going to mark a little rectangle in each corner at the top. And you want the rectangle to be 1 inch in from the edge and 2.5 inches down from the top. So 1 inch in from this edge and 2.5 inches down from the top. And then after you make that mark, you're just going to join this edge right here with this edge right here. And you're going to join them by drawing a diagonal line. And then after you draw that line in, you'll just take a pair of scissors and you want to cut on the diagonal line. You're not cutting out the rectangle, you're only cutting on the diagonal line. And then you'll go ahead and do the same exact thing on this side. 1 inch in by 2.5 inches down from the top. Draw your diagonal line. And then you'll cut right on that diagonal line. And then you can go ahead and clip your two pieces together. So going to clip the exterior canvas to the lining, right sides together. Make sure that all of your edges and your curves are all even. After it's all clipped into place, you can go ahead and cut off that extra triangle right there at the top. My flap is all clipped into place, and we will be sewing this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. So you're going to start here, come around, and end here. And if you're not confident about keeping a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just go ahead and draw them in with your ruler. And then the only thing that I need to do now is just clip off these triangles here. And then we'll go over to the sewing machine and sew this. Also, when I sew this, I'm not going to make a sharp corner here. You can if you want to, it's not a big deal. I'm going to make it a little bit rounded. I'm starting to sew the flap, and I'm going to be using a 2.5 inch stitch length. And you do want to back stitch at both ends. When I get to right here where that sharp point is, I'm not going to make it quite so sharp. I'm just going to round it a little bit, just by gently easing my presser foot around. And you'll do that on both ends. And when you get to your corner, you just go slowly. I have my hand firmly down here, but I'm not pushing the fabric, I'm just gently guiding it with my hand. And if you gently guide like this and go slowly, you don't have to pick up your presser foot and pivot. When you do that, that's what gives you those little jags in your curves. So just go slow. If you've drawn in your line, just try and stay on that line the best you can. And then again, when you get to the curve, just go slow and guide with your hand. And continue up the other side. And again, just round this corner here just a bit. And backstitch. Next, I just want to clip around these curves. So you'll just go ahead and make some snips. Make sure that you don't cut into your stitching there. I have these curves clipped, and I did clip also the little curves up here. And I'm going to take this now and turn it over to the canvas side, and I just want to start pressing back the waxed canvas. And I want to try and get it as tight to the seam as I can get it. You can also use a point turner to help burnish it down there. And then I'm going to do this side right here. Burnish it down a little bit. And then I like to take the point of my turner and I get it right underneath where those clips are on the curve. And then I can just press it down. Okay, you just want to try and burnish it down the best you can. Okay, and then once everything is burnished down well, I like to go ahead and trim this seam down to about 1/8 of an inch. You don't have to do this, but I do like to do it. The reason why we're putting clips in here, even though they're going to get cut off, is because it does help us to get a nicer finish here on the curved edges. So now I'll just trim down to about 1/8 of an inch. So I said before to trim to 1/8 of an inch. I've actually only trimmed to about 1/4 of an inch. And now we can turn everything right side out. Your wax canvas may get a little wrinkly right now, but that's okay, because that's why we like wax canvas. It gets that nice, weathered, rugged look. Now, once you have it turned right side out and pretty much in place, you can take the rounded edge of your point turner and get into those curves and then just push them out. And then what I like to do for my last step here is I like to just roll out these edges here. And you want to be able to see both edges, both the lining and the canvas edge equally, just like that. And you will be able to see a little bit of the stitching so that you know that you're right in the center. And then I just keep pressing it down with my fingers as I go along. And once we do that, we'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch all the way from the edge. Now I'm going to top stitch the flap. I am going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.0, and you can see I have some clips in here. So as I was rolling my seams out, I clipped everything in place so that they don't move. And you do want to back stitch at both ends. And just follow that little curve around. And then just like before, as you get to the curve at the bottom, just go slowly and guide with your hand, and you'll get a nice smooth curve there. Now we're done with the flap, so we're just going to put that aside, and we're going to work on the back of the bag. So what you will need to do that is your zipper, which was 14 inches long from edge to edge. You need a zipper tab that is 1 inch high by 2 inches wide. And then you need your upper back, your zipper pocket pieces, and your lower back. To prepare the zipper to sew onto the back of the bag, you want to take that zipper tab and you're going to line it up with the edge of the zipper tape right there, and you want to line it up to the edge that's opposite where the zipper pull is, and then you're going to sew it on with a 1/2 inch seam, which I've already done. Then you're going to fold it back this way, okay, and fold it in half just like this. So this edge right here is meeting the edge of the zipper tape, and then you'll fold it over again just like this. And then you're going to go over to the sewing machine and you're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this edge, and when you do, make sure that you're catching what's underneath. And you're going to sew that with a stitch length of 3.0, and I'll go do that off camera. I have that zipper tab sewn into place, and you can see I caught the canvas fabric on the bottom side with that stitching. Now we're going to set that aside for a second. I'm going to take the lower back panel, and what we want to do is mark a line 1 inch down from this top. I'm going to do that with my chalk wheel. And then I also want to mark in 1 inch from each edge here. You don't have to mark all the way down. We're just marking this for our zipper placement. So the distance between here and here should be 12 inches, which it is. And we want this zipper to be able to fit within these marks. So we're going to take the zipper now, and we're going to mark 12 inches from the bottom. I'm going to turn it over this way. So I'm just measuring 12 inches up from the bottom. And I'll just mark the top there with my chalk wheel. And now that I have that marked, I'm going to pull down the zipper, past those marks, and what I want to do is fold back on the chalk line, and then I want to move that chalk line up to the zipper teeth, just like that. And then I'm just going to put a clip in to hold it in place. And I'll do the same thing on this side. I'm just going to fold back on the chalk line and then move that chalk line up to where the zipper teeth is. And I'll put another clip in place there, just to hold it for now. And folding back the zipper tape like that, that becomes a zipper stop, and it will not go past where we folded back this tape. Now you want to go over to your sewing machine, or you could hand stitch this, it's up to you, and you want to put a few stitches in to secure that zipper in place. So I'm going to go do that now off camera. And now that I've done that, there's no danger of this zipper pull coming off, so we can just trim off these edges. Okay, now we're going to bring back this panel right here. This is the bottom of the bag, the bottom back, and we want to fold along this line right here, the one that we marked 1 inch down from the top. So I'm just folding it back right on that line. And then I'll just finger press it down. Just like that. And then we're going to take the zipper and we're going to set it in between these two marks. And then you're just going to clip this in place, and then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam away from the zipper tape. Now I have my zipper all clipped into place. Right here is where we folded, so I just unfolded that and I clipped my zipper on, making sure that my zipper will open from left to right. And you'll go over to your sewing machine now and you're just going to sew all the way across with a 1/4 inch seam and a stitch length of 3.0. To start sewing, you do need to pull down your zipper pull, and we're going to back stitch. Again, I'm using a stitch length of 3.0 and trying to maintain a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I can pull up my zipper. And back stitch. And now you want to take one of your back zipper pocket pieces. It doesn't matter which one because they're both the same height. So you'll just take one of those and you're going to pin it to the opposite side of the zipper that you just sewed on, and you'll clip that in place. And you'll go over to your sewing machine and you're going to follow your previous line of stitching to stitch that on. Now I'm sewing that pocket lining to the opposite side of the zipper. And again, just follow that previous line of stitching with a 3.0 stitch length. Going to back stitch. My zipper pull right now is at the other end of this panel, so when I get towards the zipper pull, I'm going to pull it out of place. Okay, so I'm going to stop and move that zipper pull. And then I'll stitch to the end. And back stitch. And after you have that pocket lining sewn into place, you're just going to flip it up. You can go ahead and finger press it. And you want to fold this back on this line that we drew earlier. I'm going to close my zipper. So you want to fold it right back on that line again. Flip it down this way. Make sure that that is lying flat, that there's no bubbles or anything in it. And then you're going to push your lining down so that all of your edges are meeting. So your side edges, your bottom edges. And then you're going to go back over to your sewing machine and you're going to sew 1/8 of an inch from this edge right here. And I am going to be sewing that from my lining side. And I will go do that off camera right now. Now that I have that stitching done, I'm going to turn this over. And I want to fold this back just a little bit for right now. And I want to take my flap. And I want to pin or clip the flap to the zipper. And that's going to be the opposite side of the zipper. And I want to make sure that it's centered on both sides. So I'll just take my ruler and just take some quick measurements. And it's about 1/2 inch away from each side, so that's good. And then I'll clip this to the zipper and I'll go over to the sewing machine, and then I'm going to sew straight across with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm sewing the flap onto the opposite side of the zipper right now. Now I'm going to sew the flap to the opposite side of the zipper and make sure that this part here, this is where the fold was, that's out of the way. You don't want to catch that in your stitching. and I'm going to sew from the zipper side. Doesn't really matter, you can sew from either side, but I prefer to sew from the zipper side, and sewing with a 1/4 inch seam and a stitch length of 3.0. And I'm going to pull my zipper pull out of the way. Next, you'll take your upper back piece, and that is going to get clipped to this side of the flap, and you want to make sure that when you clip that your edges with the upper back are even with your edges on the lower back. So just go ahead and clip that in place, and once you have it in place, you can go ahead to the sewing machine and sew this down following your previous line of stitching, and I will do that off camera. Now I have the upper back sewn in place on the other side of the zipper. This is what it looks like from this side. Okay, so you have the upper, you have your flap, you have the zipper, and then you have your lower back right here. So we're going to fold everything back down again, and now you're going to take the other piece for your back zipper pocket. It's the one that's identical to this one, and you're going to sew that to this side of the zipper. You'll clip it on, and then you're going to go ahead and follow your previous line of stitching, and you're going to stitch all the way across. Now I'm ready to stitch everything together. I did pull my zipper pull out of the way, and again 3.0 stitch length and a 1/4 inch seam. Try and stay on your previous line of stitching the best you can. Then when you get to your zipper pull, just once again pull it out of the way. So here's what you should have so far. Here's the upper back, here's the flap, and you have the zipper here, and here is the lower back. So we want to turn this over just like this, and here's the lower back again. You want the seam for the lower back to be facing towards the bottom. And then if you just pick these pieces up right like this and take this piece and fold it out of the way, you want to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch right along this edge right here. And what you'll actually be sewing through is this lining piece and the seam of the upper back. Okay, now I'm just going to sew along that edge right there with a stitch length of 3.0 and back stitch. Going to pull my zipper pull out of the way, and I'll stitch to the edge and back stitch. And now if you look underneath, this row that's closer to this edge, this row of stitching, is the top stitching that we just did, and this is going to help this seam right here to lay nice and flat. Now we need to clip all of the edges together with everything being even and lined up. So you're going to start at the side, and you have these two seams here, you have this one with this pocket lining and this one with this pocket lining, they need to line up. So just like this, make sure they line up edge to edge, and then you're going to put a couple of clips in. I like to put one in on each side here, and make sure that your edges are all nice and even, and clip everything together. Then we're going to flip it over and go to this side, and the same thing. We want this edge right here for the pocket lining to be even with this edge right here. So just line them up. Make sure that the edges are even and clip on both sides of it. And then we'll just clip around, keeping the edges even. You want to keep your curves all even, and just work your way around. So now I have everything clipped. This is the exterior side, this is the inside, and you want to make sure that this measures 11 inches from here to here, just like we did for the front. And you have to measure from the center, because if you're measuring towards the sides, you obviously have the curves there. That's not going to work. But if you just put your ruler down and ensure that it measures 11 inches, just like we did for the front. So now you want to go over to the sewing machine, and you're going to base this, starting up here, all the way around the bottom and back up the other side and end here. So just go ahead and baste all the way around exactly the same way that you did for the front. I finished my basting, and now you can open up your zipper, and you're going to see that you have another pocket that's the full depth of the bag. The other thing you want to do is take your front and put your pieces together and make sure that they're both the same height. So from here to here, the edges should all be even. Now we're going to work on the bottom and the sides of the bags. So you're going to need the pieces for your D-ring connectors, the D-ring connector bands. We'll put those aside for right now. And then you need your bag sides and your bag bottom. Now there's only one bag bottom piece, okay, and then you have two bag sides. Now we're going to sew these end to end. So you can go ahead and clip them together. And then you'll clip the bottom to the other side. And you want to sew these with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So 1/2 inch from this edge and 1/2 inch in from this edge, and I'm going to do it off camera. I'll use a stitch length of 2.5. Now I've sewn both sides to the bottom. After sewing that 1/2 inch seam on each side, I finger pressed the seams towards the center bottom, and then I flipped it over and I stitched 1/8 of an inch away from each edge right here. And now I'm going to take a ruler, and I want to make some marks on each side. So with my ruler and my chalk wheel, I'm going to mark down 1/2 of an inch, and then 1.5 inches, and then 3 inches. And you'll do this to both sides. And now that I've marked each side, I'm just going to take my D-ring connectors. You should have 2 of those. And I want to fold each one in half along the long side. So this is the 6 inch side, and I'm using 1.5 inch hardware. So I just fold that in half, and then I fold in towards the center, and then in towards the center again, and then I fold the entire piece in half, just like this. So I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from each of these folded edges. And you want to do the same exact thing to your other piece. And I'll go do that off camera. Now I've sewn my connectors and I have my single loop hardware here, and I've already placed one of them on this side, and I will show you now how to do it on the other side. So you're going to take this panel right here and fold back on that 1/2 inch line. So you just fold it back and finger press it. And after you do that, you'll take the other connector and you'll slip it onto the hardware. You'll get your bottom edges even there. And you want to place it with this fold right here, right up against this folded edge, and centered on the panel. So you just take your ruler and measure both sides to make sure that it's centered. Okay, and mine is centered, and then I just took a longer Wonder clip to hold it in place. And then we'll go over to the sewing machine and sew this down together. Now to secure this down, I don't want my presser foot to push anything out of place when I start sewing. So the best way to avoid that from happening is to just drop your needle down. And I'm sewing with a stitch length of about 3.0, and I'm just going to start going forward, and then I'll go backwards, and I'm going to go over this a few times. And then I'm going to move up a little bit and do the same thing. And I'll do it one more time, and this will make it very strong. And now that I have the connectors sewn on, I'm going to take these D-ring connector bands here, and I'm going to fold one long edge in towards the middle. Then I'll fold the other long edge in towards the middle. It doesn't really have to be the middle. That's close enough. And then I'll take this, and this is going to sit in between these lines right here. So you'll put that on. You'll put on a few clips to hold it in place, and then you'll go over to the sewing machine and you're going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from each edge here, and you'll do that to both sides. And now I'm just going to sew on those connector bands, sewing 1/8 of an inch away from each edge with a stitch length of 3.0. Back stitch, and I'll go ahead and sew the other side of it. And then just go ahead and sew the other side in the same way. While we're at the sewing machine, I want to sew 2 lines of stay stitching, and it's just going to be a straight line of stitching that goes right from the bottom of this band here all the way to this point here. And we want to sew this just shy of 1/2 of an inch, and you're going to do it with a stitch length of 2.5. And you don't need to do any back stitching here. You just want to sew a straight line. And then you want to move to the other side, right up here, and you'll do the same thing, but this time you're starting from the bottom and you're working up towards that band. And then you can flip the whole thing over and do the same exact thing on this side. So here's the sides with the connectors in and the stay stitching on both sides. I'm going to set this aside for a minute, and I'm going to bring back my front piece. And what I want to do now is take the ruler and a chalk wheel, and I'm just going to mark 1/2 inch down from the top. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fold back on that 1/2 inch mark there. And then we'll just finger press everything down nicely. And you want to do the same exact thing to the top edge of your back piece. So here's my top edge. I'm going to draw the 1/2 inch chalk line down and then fold this under as well. Now we're ready to pin the gusset to the front of the bag. This is actually an exciting part because this is where we see everything come together. So you want to take the gusset and you want to fold it in half to find the middle. So you can just line up these seams right here and then just give a little press, and do that on the other side as well. And then once you have the center, you want to make sure that you have the center of the front panel too. It should be right here, but I'm just going to fold it in half just to make sure. And there you go, we're right at the center there. So now you'll take the gusset and match up the centers right here. So you're going to match this mark up to here. And I like to put a clip on both sides of that center. And then you want to take this end and you want to match it up to the top edge of the front. Make sure that the top edges and the side edges are all even. And put a couple of clips in there. Always make sure that all of your edges are even as you're doing this. And then you'll take the other end of the gusset and same thing. Match up your edges. And you'll put in a couple of clips. Now, I start clipping down towards the curve. And I'll go from this end, from the middle here, towards the curve again. And now we need to ease in the curve. And what I like to do is put a few clips in this area where the curve is going to be. I'm not going to clip up to the stitching. I'm going about halfway between the edge and the stitching. And these little clips right here will help that to form around the curve very nicely. So now you're going to take this and bring it right up to the curve. And if you round it around your fingers, that will also help it to fit in. You want to try and make sure it's as smooth as it can be without any puckers. And that's going in very nicely. Now when we sew this at the sewing machine, we're going to be sewing with a 1/2 inch seam, so that should be coming in a little bit past that line of stay stitching. And then you'll go ahead and set in the other side. And you're going to clip this exactly the same way we did on the opposite side. So here's everything clipped into place, and my curves are laying in there nice and smoothly with no puckers. Now that I have the gusset pinned into the front, I'm going to go sew it at the sewing machine off camera. But I will show you how to sew the back of the bag to the gusset. And the reason why I'm just going to show you that side is because it is more difficult with the flap. I have the gusset sewn into the front. The seam width was 1/2 inch, and I sewed with a stitch length of 2.5. As you sew, you want to just make sure that everything in the curved area stays flat, and as you're sewing it, you can manipulate this piece around and it will help everything to stay flat so that you don't get any puckers. Now, once I was done sewing it, I went and I sewed a second line of stitching over my first line of stitching for some strength, and then I trimmed down my seams, but I left the full seam at the tops and I just trimmed in the seam to 1/4 inch around this area here. Also, when you sew it, you want to make sure that the fold that we created at the top is open. Now we want to sew in the back side to the gusset, so you're going to do the same thing. Just fold this in half and find the center. And then you'll clip this in place the same way that you did for the front. Now I'm sewing the gusset to the back of the bag. You want to make sure that these top edges that we had folded down 1/2 inch are unfolded right now. And we're going to start, we're sewing with a 1/2 inch seam and a stitch length of 2.5. You want to back stitch. My flap is here, it's up and out of the way. When you're sewing with the wax canvas, it's a little bit unforgiving and it tends to be a little stretchy at times. So just go slow. If you end up getting a pucker anywhere, just keep going, because you will be able to rip out that little section where the pucker is and then ease everything down and sew over it again. Now you really want to go slowly here. Try avoid getting any puckers the first time around. It's also important that the edge of the gusset stays near the edge of the back of the bag or the front of the bag, whichever side you're sewing in, because as it moves in, it will create a pucker. Also, staying close to your line of stay stitching there also helps with the puckers. I might have a little pucker right there, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to keep going. And if you do get a pucker, what I suggest is before you rip it out and re-sew it, turn the bag right side out, because sometimes that pucker will disappear as you're turning. So we're around the first curve. And now we'll just keep sewing all the way around. You're going to go past the curve on the opposite side and up the top, and you'll back stitch when you get to the top. And now that I'm finished sewing that, I'm just going to go back and check and make sure that there are no puckers in my curves. And if I'm satisfied with everything, I'm actually going to go back and restitch over this line a second time for some strength. So now I have the back sewn into the gusset, and it went very well. I did not get any puckers on either curve, and that's just because I went slowly and just made sure that everything was easing in properly. Then after I did that, I went ahead and trimmed that seam down to 1/4 of an inch, and I only trimmed to below the band. So now we can take the whole piece and turn it right side out. Just smooth everything down. Smooth out all of your curves at the bottom. You can also use your point turner to help you smooth out those curves. And then I just like to sort of roll everything out all around the curves. And I will use my point turner also as I do this. And then we'll just fold back all of these edges here. And next we'll start working on our lining, which is going to be a drop-in lining. Now we're going to work on the interior lining. So you need your interior pocket, your gussets, your front and back lining, and your center divider. And we're going to start with the interior pocket. So we're simply going to take this interior pocket and we're just going to fold it in half. And you'll put a few clips in each side, and you're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew 1/2 of an inch away from each edge with a stitch length of 2.0. And I'm going to do that off camera. After sewing down these side seams, you just want to clip the corner right here. Make sure that you don't clip into your stitching, and then you want to press everything open. And now we're just going to turn this right side out. And you can take your point turner and gently coax out those corners. Just be careful not to poke through your stitching. Then you'll take this over to your iron and iron this all nice and flat. And then you'll do a row of top stitching along the top fold, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.0. Now I have one of my center divider pieces here. It has the Decoville on the back, and I've drawn a box. So my box is 2.5 inches up from the bottom, and it's 1.5 inches in from each side, and then this line right here is 2 inches down from the top. And this is basically the placement of the pocket. So what you want to do is take the pocket and put the bottom edge, this is the raw edge, and you want to place it right along the bottom there. And you'll go over to the sewing machine and sew this with a 1/4 of an inch seam all the way across with a stitch length of 2.0. Now the pocket is sewn down here in place. I'm just going to take a scissor and just do a little snip in the corners here. And then we'll fold this up, and you want to press it down very nicely. Then you'll go over to the sewing machine and you're going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from this edge, and then you're going to pivot and sew along this way, and you'll be sewing maybe a little bit larger than 1/4 of an inch across, because the idea is when you sew that seam down there, you want to be encasing this seam. And since we sewed that 1/4 of an inch, you'll sew it slightly more than 1/4 of an inch. Then when you're done with that row of stitching, you'll pivot and stitch 1/8 of an inch up this side. Now, you can divide this up however you like. If you want to put a cell phone in there, then I would suggest taking your cell phone and figuring out about how big that pocket needs to be. So for me, if I put another line of stitching right here, that should fit that cell phone comfortably. So I'll mark a line there, and then you have to decide what you want to do with this section. Do you want to leave it as one big section here, or do you want to divide it up for pens? That's totally your choice. However you want to divide this will be totally your choice. So go ahead and mark everything that you want to sew, all the sections, and then you can go over to your sewing machine and just sew on the lines that you've drawn. Now I'm going to do all of the edge stitching for this interior pocket, and I'll be sewing with a stitch length of 3.0. Now at the tops of all of these lines, you want to backstitch a few times because those will be stress points, and you want them to be nice and strong. And then I'm going to stop my stitching a little bit further in than 1/4 of an inch and stitch straight across. And then I'm going to pivot and stitch 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom. And if you look under here right now, I'll take this out so you can see, I've encased that raw edge right down there so you can't see it. And that's exactly what you want to do. And then pivot and sew 1/8 of an inch up this side. And then backstitch a few times. Now I've decided that I just want to have 2 little bit larger pockets so that I can fit a few pens in each one, rather than a more narrow pocket where I could probably only put in 1 pen. This will also accommodate if I have some markers that I want to put in there. So again, we're going to backstitch over that bottom part a few times and sew up the line, and then backstitch a few times at the top. And then however many lines you have, you want to go ahead and do the same thing. So everything is sewn into place now, and I'll just test this to make sure, and the cell phone fits in there very well, so I have enough room for that. And then you're going to take your other center divider and you're going to put these right sides together. And we're going to match up all of our edges, clip everything in place, and then you'll sew 1/2 of an inch right along the top edge here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a stitch length of 2.5. Now I have my seam sewn, and I went ahead and pressed it open, and now we want to fold wrong sides together. Just make sure that all of your edges here are all even with each other, and then go over to the sewing machine and sew 1/8 of an inch away from this top edge with a stitch length of 3.0, about 1/8 of an inch away from the fold. Now I've completed that top stitching, and then I also went ahead and basted these 2 layers together, and I just did that 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Now you're going to go ahead and take your gussets. One of them is narrow and one of them is wider. The narrow one will be pinned to this side of the divider pocket, and this one gets pinned to this side of the divider pocket. So you need to go ahead and find the center of both of your gussets, and you need to find the center of this piece here. So you can do what we've been doing all along, just folding it in half. And this time I'm just going to make a tiny little clip, and I mean tiny. You don't want to go past your seam allowance. And I have a little V shape there now, right here, and that's my center. And now that I found the center of both gussets, I'm going to sew a line of stay stitching on both sides of the gussets along the full length. So now we're going to clip this in. So I'm matching up those notches, and I'm going to clip on each side of the center there. And then I'm going to bring this around and match up the tops. And then I will start clipping down towards the center. And then I'm going to turn it this way and clip towards the curve. And then I'm going to take my scissors and make a few clips in here where the curve is. And again, I'm not going all the way up to the stitching. And if you don't want to put clips in here, you don't have to. And then I'll roll it around my finger like this. Make sure the edges meet. Roll it around your fingers and then clip. Just like this. And then you'll go ahead and you'll clip in the other side, and then I'll take you over to the sewing machine and we'll sew this in together. And that is how it should sit in there. Now I'm ready to sew with this gusset. I'm using a stitch length of 2.5 and my seam allowance is 1/2 of an inch. So you do want to back stitch. And when you get down to the curve, you just want to go slowly. And you can see how I manipulated this part right here as I was sewing around the curve to avoid getting any puckers. You can see I have a little bit of extra fabric here, and I'm seeing right up here at the top my edges weren't even. So that little bit can make a big difference. That's why you want to make sure that your edges are always even. So that's all sewed in now, and everything went very well. I don't have any puckers in the curves here. And then after I sewed everything down, I turned this top down, this top edge, I turned it down 1/2 of an inch and ironed it. And I also ironed this seam down right here along the gusset. So now you want to take your center divider, and that's now going to get pinned to the gusset. And we want to pin this with this pocket facing towards the larger gusset. So you're going to put it in like this and match up that center. And then you're going to pin or clip all the way around. And what's going to happen is you're going to have extra at the top, and that's fine. You're supposed to have some extra at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this in place, and then I'll show you what it should look like. So here's the divider pocket, and this pocket right here should be facing towards, this would be the front of the bag, and it's also the side that has the wider gusset. So it's all clipped into place, and up here you're going to have your gusset extend above the divider, and it should be equally distant on both sides, and it's approximately 1.5 inches. If it's off a tiny little bit, don't worry about it. So now you'll go ahead, and from this side you're going to sew the gusset all the way around the same exact way when we sewed in this side. So after sewing everything together, this is what you should have. This is the divider pocket. You can see the pocket in there. And this is the back of it. And now that that's done, you want to take the other front lining piece and pin the other gusset to it and sew it in place just like we did before. Here's the narrow gusset sewn in to the back panel right here. I did go ahead and iron all of these seams open like I did before. And if we turn this, you can see that I have a nice rounded corner with no puckers. This is what the seam looks like on this side, and this is what the seam looks like on that side. And this right here is not a pucker, it's just a wrinkle. Now, we need to take this piece right here and sew it to the other section. So I'm going to have this one face up. This is the center divider right here. We're going to put the center divider facing the back panel right here. And then you want to take your sides. So this is the side right here of the gusset, and we're going to match that with the gusset on the other side and put in a couple of clips. And then, as always, you're going to match up the centers. So here's the center of the first panel that we sewed together, and that is going to get pinned to this side of the gusset right here. And then you're going to work around and clip everything exactly the way you've done before. And you'll clip the curves, if you want to, on this gusset, on the narrow gusset, to ease into the corner. And then you're just going to clip everything all around and go ahead and sew it exactly the same way that we've been doing all along. Now I have the two sections clipped together, and I'm going to start sewing. But you have to remember to keep this part tucked out of the way and the upper part tucked out of the way all along the whole route that you're sewing on here. And you do have to keep checking it because it is a little bit trickier with the two sections together. And you'll go ahead and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a 2.5 inch stitch length. So now all of my sections are sewn together, and what I'm going to do now is just go all along this route here and make sure that nothing got caught, because as I said, you have to make sure that both sections are pushed out of the way as you're sewing this seam here. So you just go ahead and make sure that nothing got caught in that stitching line. And then you want to take your bag. So here's the exterior of the bag, and you're just going to place it, the lining inside of it, just to make sure that everything is fitting properly. So we're not going to sew it in yet, but you want to push it all the way down in there, and just make sure that these tops line up, and you want to make sure that the sides all line up, and that everything is fitting in nicely. And then once you're satisfied that the lining is fitting in there properly, you want to take it out, and then we're going to go ahead and do some trimming. So on each one of these seams here, we want to start a few inches down from the top and clip in, and then you're going to start trimming all around the edge to about 1/4 of an inch. And then on this side, you want to make sure again that you start cutting a few inches down from the top, and then you'll start cutting this seam. And for this seam right here, the middle one, you can just go ahead and do the same thing. Clip down just a little ways. I'm actually clipping right above where the divider is, because this is the section where the divider is, and then I'm going to clip all the way around. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll start setting the lining into the bag. After you've trimmed down all of your seams and you're happy with the way the lining fits inside the bag, you want to take the bag lining and put it inside the exterior bag. And then we're going to start clipping all around. So I like to start with the sides. I match up the side seams, and I'll put in a clip. Then I match up the opposite side seam and put in another clip, and then I'll put in a couple right along the side there. And I do the same thing at the other end, and of course you want these edges to be turned under by 1/2 an inch when you're clipping everything. Now when you sew, you're going to have to make sure that this is out of the way. So that needs to be folded down when you're sewing it. And again, I'm clipping the side seams. And of course, these seams right here that I left to the 1/2 inch seam allowance, you want those to be open on both the lining and the exterior bag. So match them up and then clip them. And if you like, you can use some binder clips for this. And I probably will put in a few because the binder clips are stronger and it will hold a little bit better. So after you clipped your sides, then you go ahead and you clip the fronts and the backs together. So now we're going to sew in the lining, and we're sewing it from the interior side of the bag. I have everything clipped in, and I alternated between using Wonder Clips and binder clips. The binder clips are strong and they really hold everything together. So I'm just going to line everything up to sew with a 1/8 inch top stitching away from that top edge there, and a stitch length of 3.0. Starting in the back, make sure your flap is out of the way. You don't want to catch your flap in your stitching. Just going to give a little back stitch here as I start. Remember to keep this tucked down out of the way. There's not a lot of clearance there, so you want to make sure you pull it all the way down. And then as you get towards the end, you'll start to pull the bag up a little bit so that you can get to that side. And just go slow. So I'm pulling up a little bit more. I'm just adjusting it so it's kind of sitting on its side now. And that D-ring connector is out of the way. Now I'm actually sewing where the side of the bag is. Actually, I'm sorry, I just came to the front of the bag. And now I can keep the bag flat again. So you'll just keep going just like this, and when you get to the second side you'll do the same thing. Sort of roll the bag up on its side, sew across the side, and back to where you started. And when you get back to where you started, just do another back stitch over that original stitching. The last thing that we need to do is sew the shoulder strap. So you want to take your piece for your shoulder strap and you want to fold it in half and finger press. And then you'll get that crease right down the center here. And then you're going to take each one of these sides and fold it in towards the center. Finger press on both sides. And then you want to fold the entire piece in half, just like this. And we're going to sew it at the sewing machine 1/8 of an inch away from the edge all the way around with a stitch length of 3.0. But before you do your top stitching, you want to open up each end just like this. And then you want to fold it back on itself. So this would be right sides together, just like this. And you want to sew a seam that's 1/2 inch away from the edge. And I've already done that on this end to show you. So here it's folded right sides together, and I created a 1/2 inch seam. And then I'm going to take my scissors and just clip off that end there. And then I can finger press open that seam. And then I'm going to fold that back down towards the center, just the way it was before. And then we'll flip it so that the seam is on the inside there. And you can get in there with your point turner and make a nice point. And what that's going to do is give you a finished edge at the end of the strap. And then of course you'll go ahead, do the same thing at the other end, and you'll fold everything back the way it was. And now I'm going to sew the strap. I did put in some Wonder Clips along the length to hold those two folded edges together. That way nothing will shift on me as I'm sewing. And you're going to sew with a 1/8 inch top stitching away from the edge all the way around with a stitch length of 3.0. So just go ahead and sew your strap now. The lining is all sewn in, and now we're going to attach the shoulder strap. So I have it done here, and what we need to do is take that double loop ring that we have here and just put it on one side of the loop and then over the bar and through the other side of the loop. Okay, and just slide it on a bit. And then you want to take one end and put it through one side here of the single loop. Pull it through. And then you're going to take this double loop here and push the strap up. Then you'll take the other end of the shoulder strap and put it right in between, just like this. So on one side of the bar, pull it up and then let it go down on the other side of the bar. And then you can just pull everything back, and you want to go ahead and sew this. So you'll sew it down, make a little box, or you can use some rivets, whichever you like. I usually like to sew a box and then put in a couple of rivets, and it'll make it very strong. So that's how it goes on one side. And then the other side, you just simply take like this and put it through the other single loop right here, and then just fold it over, and you're going to do the same thing. Sew a little box and put in some rivets if you want. So here's the bag all completed. Now my flap, I want it to be just a flap, but if you want to put a closure on here, you certainly can. You can put in magnetic snaps or thumb locks, whatever you like. So now let's see what we can put in here. I have my iPad, and that'll go in this pocket right here. My iPad is in a case, so it's well protected, and I'm not worried about anything happening to it. And I can put in my charger. So here's my charger. And I can put that in the same section with the iPad. It'll fit right down in there. I can put in my wallet and my journal. Will fit down in there very well. My eyeglass case is here, and I have my Apple Pencil and a couple of pens. I can also put a pen right in the front pocket that I created for that. Also in the front pocket, I can put in my earbuds. Just stuff those down in there. So there's the earbuds in there. This can take a small notebook. My keys. Now you can put a D-ring holder for your keys on here. I do have the cutting instructions for it in the manual, but I didn't do it in the video. But I actually like to use this front pocket here to throw in a lot of things that I just need to grab quickly. I also have a book that I might want to carry with me. I can put that in there. And of course the phone, I can put that down in there. And then don't forget, you have the back pocket back here. This pocket, as well as the one in the front, goes the whole depth of the bag, so there's plenty of room to stuff things in there. And you really have lots and lots of room, and lots of separate spaces for everything. And what's going to end up happening is that the bag is going to be too heavy for you to carry because you can actually fit so much in it. So there you go. We've completed the bag. I hope that you've enjoyed the video, and I hope that you've enjoyed making the bag along with me. I give a sincere thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. And if you have not already done so, please like and subscribe.